So in this process of initiation, we move on to the next phase where we start talking about stakeholders, statement of work, and ultimately what you want to do at the end of this is release a charter. So the way projects progress is first we have the initiation phase, which have all these elements to it. And the project charter is basically the deliverable of this phase, because what a project charter does is if it's signed off, then somebody is going to be named project manager. And so therefore the project has begun and the project manager can actually have the authority to go do things. The next stage is planning, meaning you had your preliminary proposal in the initiation phase, and now you have to dig down into the details, pick people, what resources are going to need, what's the budget, and everything else. And so what comes out of the project planning stage is the project plan. Makes sense? The next phase is the execution phase. Now, some people split this into two phases, meaning the execution phase and the monitoring and control phase. Meaning the execution phase is, okay, now that we're executing this, what are the processes and everything that we're going to use? And so you make changes. And then when you're locked into something, then it's about monitoring and controlling and making sure that the project is going to go the way it should go. And as you can see, this is a monitoring and control phase, and there's a project closing phase. Some project management books have it as 4 phases, some have it as 5. It's not quite uniform. So in the initiation phase, first I need to figure out the stakeholders, but there's somebody who's a project champion and somebody who's a project sponsor, and there's subtle differences. You also make the biggest decision of all. Remember, this is a game, and your first choice in every game is, do I play or not play? You make the business case, which we've talked of, your statement of work. It's not only internal, but today a lot of people have their work done outside through vendors and things like that, so you have to think about the external work. And what the project charter is basically tells who, what, where, why, and how, what assumptions you make, what kind of risks do you make. And typically, more mature companies will have templates to fill out for this. So stakeholder management. The stakeholders are basically any and all individuals that can actually impact your project. And it can potentially be positive, it can potentially be negative. And stakeholder analysis is the way we can figure out how to resolve conflicts between people, because we have a planning process where we can resolve these kind of contradictions. What it starts with is people. Now, diversity is actually really important. And that said, today problems are big and very complex. And so here's our problem. And one person can basically solve that much of the problem. And if we have diverse people, and the thing you would say is, for example, people from India think differently than people from the United States. Men think different than women. Older people think differently than young people. I mean, this is diversity. And so what happens is each of them brings their own skills so they can actually solve the problem and cover the space that needs to be solved. Now let's take that same problem, and the person knows this much how to solve it, but they just want more people like them. And so this is what you end up getting. And this is part of the reason why the United States owned the 20th century. And that's because we had so much diversity, plus we had the freedom to pursue things, that what it comes down to is you have this whole mass trying to solve a problem. And so we have pieces that were much more powerful. Stakeholders can be internal, so they could be people like this. And parties like QA or finance or things like that actually matter too. Human resources, because you're going to have to manage those people. You know, they want to get paid and stuff like that. External stakeholders can actually be competitors. They can actually impact. They may not work with you directly, but they do have an impact on what's going on. And so suppliers, regulators, those kind of people. In terms of stakeholder relationships, here's a map, which is straight out of your book, that impacts the project manager. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, in terms of managing stakeholders, you identify it before you start planning, and you engage them during the planning phase. So first you need to assess the environment, identify what your goals are, what are the capabilities of different people, what is the problem you're trying to solve, what solutions are you going to pursue. Can you validate it in some way? Test it and then refine it. Validation means, yes, I can prove that this actually works. And verification means, yes, this works and I can do it more than once. And that's actually really important and feels like chemistry, where it's hard to get uniformity run to run. And so when you engage people, how much should you engage them? And what it comes down to is how much influence can they have on your project versus how much interest do they have. And so some people need to be involved and engaged heavily. Some people, not as much. They just need to be consulted. And so be kept in the loop. Your culture is based on speed and flexibility. However, you have to balance that against, you want that speed, but you have to balance that against risk. And so how do you reduce those errors? One way to do it is document and control things. And the problem is it's a pendulum that takes place between chaos and order. Meaning when you have too much order, then I need some chaos. For example, we have too many laws, we have too many rules. Okay, well, let's get rid of some of them. Okay, now we swing back towards creativity again. Uh-oh, we removed the wrong laws. Then we have to swing back to order, and so on and so forth. In terms of the players, who are they? There's a project sponsor, and this is a person who's responsible for the overall success of the program. They have to define the criteria of what is success, and they have to ensure the successful delivery of the project. The project champion is a person who praises the project. This person is the evangelist internally. They talk about the project. They explain it and communicate it to others. Now, can the sponsor also be the project champion? Yes. But in many cases, they're actually different people, meaning somebody might champion the project, but they don't want to be responsible for all the technical stuff. And ultimately, what these people do is pick the project manager, who's a person they think can pull this off. So when you kick off your project, you have to put together an agenda, introductions, like 2 truths and a lie, have a review of what it is, have a discussion that everybody understands what you're going to do, and then figure out what you're going to do at the next meeting. Kickoffs are important because people don't know each other, and what we'll find out is you go through stages as a team, and the first stage is forming, and everybody's on their best behavior and everything else because people don't know each other, and eventually you're going to get into conflict. However, that could be a good thing. And now we execute. These are all the knowledge areas that we're responsible for and that there are processes for. In terms of life cycle stages, how many man hours are there? As you can guess, it's mostly in your execution phase, and then it terminates. The triple constraint basically defines what the limits are to your project, and that's why they call it a constraint. And if you don't have enough of all 3, then quality suffers. Now, you can trade off against these. Again, if my scope expands, well, we'll give you more money so you can cover it. So all of a sudden, money can cover scope. In terms of performance, what are you interested in? Technology, how do you compare it to your industry? And also the context of what's going on, whether it's the market or whatever. So the Airbus A380 for my air management majors, there were 2 totally different approaches to airlines. Now, they knew international travel was going to expand. And so Boeing's attitude is, let's make a large plane, but not too large, because then we can make more of them, and people have more flexibility in terms of time. Airbus, on the other hand, took the other approach and saying, let's make flying cities, and they're humongous. And it's really interesting between these two companies, because first Airbus was winning, and then, Boeing had all its problems, and now Airbus is in trouble because people can't afford mega airplanes. And so that's an issue for them. It doesn't mean either of them was right or wrong, but they had different visions and what they believed in, and the market is going to pick the winners and losers. What happens is your project reflects your strategy. And so these are examples of strategy, and these are examples of projects that came out of it. I think you can read that. In terms of your business case, if you say, well, how do I write a business case? Well, here it is for you. Essentially, just fill in all these boxes, and that puts together a business case of what you're trying to make. A statement of work describes the work. It gives these parts: the objectives, a brief description, the outcomes, the funding constraints, and the timelines. There are different types of statements of work. The Department of Defense, which I think is about to become the Department of War. Nah, don't get me started. But these get extremely detailed, and that's how their limit of it is that it's got to weigh less than 8 pounds. But the history of your statement of work matters, meaning how many revisions you have and stuff like that. And typically that's why you have numbers, so people can keep track. It's really funny at MIT and computer science. Every time you save your program, say it's called Dr. Cho 1. Well, if I save it, then it'll save automatically. It'll increment the number to Dr. Cho 2, then Dr. Cho 3. And what students always did is after you're ready to turn it in, then you change the name so it'll go back to 1, because people don't want to be embarrassed by Dr. Cho 168 and things like that. In a comprehensive statement of work table, again, description and scope, what approach, and all these things, what resource tables. These are the things that describe what's in a statement of work. Your charter goes according to this recipe. So as you can see, a lot of these are templates. And so just fill in the boxes, but you need to go out and get that information. And this is partially why AI is becoming popular, because now people don't need to spend a lot of time writing up charters. They can have AI write it for them. The charter is typically done after the statement of work. The sponsor gets the project started and picks the PM. The PM and the sponsor actually sometimes are the same person. In terms of an integrated plan, the charter is approval to move ahead, and you can see samples in your book. You have to have an assumptions log, and that's that people want to know, okay, how much of this is factual that you do know, and how much of this are you making assumptions? And so they want to know what those things are, and you have to document it. This is how you deal with risk. This is the end of talking about the documentation period, and now we're rolling on to being approved as being a project manager.